Earlier this year in Star Citizen, there was an organized attack by a group of players on an event known as The Experience. For those of you who do not know, The Experience is a public event where players board an Origin 890 jump and go on a guided tour around Stanton. While this type of thing isn't what I play the game for, I can respect the effort and dedication to organizing the event. I can also respect the dedication of those who went on to attack and interrupt said event. That is what makes Star Citizen a true open world: danger, risk, reward, and the narratives that result from those things. You simply cannot get these stories from instance-based modern MMOs, which are more akin to single-player games with chat rooms instead of true MMOs. This attack understandably caused outrage within the community, and the participants in the attack received suspensions, warnings, and possibly more punishments from CIG. This prompted a massive forum thread where PvP players were asking for clarity, which did eventually get a response from CIG. The thread. On February 8th, 2024, a thread titled Metagaming, Player-Organized Events, and Organized Warfare was created, which went on to request quote-unquote clarity from CIG for what does and does not constitute acceptable PvP within the game. They cited a thread made on March 2nd, 2020 by Xylo, which states several of the following things. For a majority of these matters, a PvP solution is preferable. Frequently, when these scenarios are reported to us, we encourage those who feel they are being targeted to rally with their friends and orgs in an attempt to fight back. We are not here to protect players from aggressors, pirates, and PvPers. A big part of Star Citizen is about that dichotomy, that epic clash that occurs when opposing forces meet and rally others to their cause. The wars at Jumptown were a prime example of the exciting emergent gameplay that can blossom when a lawful player comes face to face with an outlaw. That is then followed by, however, there is a line that is occasionally crossed where players are going outside the bounds of immersing themselves as a pirate/PvPer. Some users are going out of their way to leverage live streams and other mediums to excessively grief. In many of these cases, it is no longer about enjoying the game, but rather disrupting it. Stream sniping, pad ramming, firing into armistice zones, or utilizing various exploits to grief others. These are just a few examples of excessive griefing, which we do not tolerate. If you find yourself on the receiving end of this, we are more than happy to investigate, and in cases where it's warranted, we will absolutely intervene. These are all pretty reasonable stances for CIG to have. It perfectly and clearly outlines what is and is not acceptable. It also properly illustrates their desire to allow players to handle PvP grievances as opposed to stepping in and handling them for the player. The issue seems to arise from several players who participated in the attack on the event receiving some form of punishment. I personally cannot confirm this as I do not interact with those people, but assuming they were, it raised some significant concerns and can potentially put CIG down a dangerous road where players begin to weaponize the report system to punish players for legitimate actions. This has been a long-standing concern of mine, and it takes a very strong company with a strong vision not to go down this road. The reply. In the thread created on February 8th, 2024, Xylo made a response. This response did not seem to please the majority of the people from the PvP community. Instead of reading it in its entirety, I'm going to give you the most important parts. The first, we still believe in and encourage PvP solutions to in-game conflict. Our commitment to a player-driven universe remains the same. It's important to note that we are not eager to police PvP encounters, and in the vast majority of cases, we prefer players to engage in organic PvP without intervention. However, there is a line where we will issue warnings, particularly to groups that take it to an extreme, making disruption their primary purpose for playing. The second, We also acknowledge the responsibility on our part to create a universe that self-manages these types of encounters through a robust reputation and law system, alongside a variety of tweaks and additions to appropriately balance risk versus reward. As you know, today, the game is not equipped for a fair balance of player factions, at least not to the degree we intend. And currently, an event weeks in the making can be wiped out with minimal effort. This has been seen more frequently lately with pad ramming and A2 flybys, commonly followed by videos mocking those impacted, all with very little gameplay repercussions. And finally, it's also important to understand that our recent warnings were directed at a specific group that we deemed as more radically impacting the intended alpha experience. Lastly, I want to clarify that our current stance is also not permanent. Espionage, piracy, and sabotage have their place in our universe, and we anticipate a more balanced and refined system to accommodate this as the game progresses. Despite a seemingly large amount of PvP-oriented players in that thread being dissatisfied with the answer, I personally found it to be the best he could do without upsetting everyone too much. You've got to understand these developers, whether they like it or not, are public figures. And whatever they say can and will be dissected, analyzed, and used to support or condemn arguments at any time. Xylo could not simply come out and say, "Yeah, we don't like PvPers going after streamers or events. If you do, you're banned." Because that would be bogus and infuriate almost everyone in the PvP community. He also couldn't come out and say, "Grow a pair and deal with it, undocking his consent." Because that would upset the PvE community. This was the best answer he could give while trying to placate the two very extreme dichotomies of the gameplay spectrum, the PvP and PvE player bases. PvP and PvE are best together. For me, PvP and PvE aren't like oil and water. They're more akin to sweet and savory. While one doesn't mix at all, the other complements it quite well, despite residing on opposite ends of the flavor spectrum. I've always found that games which combine both end up being far more fun and memorable than those that don't. That's why I strongly oppose the ridiculous idea of completely and totally separating these gameplay styles from one another. It's not that I am against high-sec, low-sec divides, but I am completely against one part of the game being mutually exclusive from the other. There will always be players out there who never do PvP and others who never do PvE, and that is totally fine. It is your game, and you should play it how you want. However, I want whatever you do, be it PvP or PvE, to have some sort of impact on one another, whether it is direct or indirect. A great example of this would be a cargo hauler in high-sec loading up important goods and materials and eventually having to jump it over to low-sec for maximum profits. The hauler, a PvE-minded player, would benefit from the employment of bringing along some PvP-minded players. The players in low-sec may greatly benefit from the material being brought over from high-sec and may decide to steal for themselves, or even offer to secure the station he is coming to free of charge because the goods he is bringing are that important to the masses. Those masses may be PvP or PvE focused, but it doesn't matter. It is in everyone's best interest it arrives. This simple scenario has created a story. It has created emergent gameplay. That could never happen with a strict PvE, PvP only rule set. That is why so many games which live by those rule sets feel so hollow and soulless. They're safe, sanitary, and by design uninteresting. Additionally, the potential for added danger, even if improbable, will make whatever mundane task a player is undertaking feel more rewarding. Even if there is only a 5% chance of harm in high-sec, there is still a possibility, and that possibility adds value to whatever they are doing. PvP isn't griefing. I hear the word griefer thrown around now more than ever. It is possibly a sign of the times, where the standard reaction of the modern human male when confronted by a bully is to run and appeal to authority instead of defending themselves as God intended. To those sorts of people, any and all PvP interactions they are presented with are viewed as griefing, and the perpetrators are labeled as griefers. That's simply not true. Griefing is a thing, and I would personally define it as somebody using unintended gameplay mechanics to prevent you from actually playing the game. Things such as blocking elevators with gurneys, using the tractor beam inside Grimhex to knock down and harm people, or even ramming pads. That is griefing. And even then, my reaction isn't to open a ticket to CIG, but I will often get the boys together and do it right back to them, but even worse. Am I advocating that you do that? Well, in a way, yes, but I am sure CIG would disagree. And it is probably best to report the legitimate griefers instead. I'm still going to come back and pad ram the pad rammer though, and may even crush that guy in Grimhex with a box too. But if you are in the game world, minding your own business, and somebody comes up and destroys you, that's just the way it is. You were not griefed, you were destroyed. Fair and square. It doesn't matter if you're at a station, at an event, or minding your own business minding rocks on Lyria. The moment you boot up this game, you're a fair target, and that danger adds value to the world and everything you do in it. That isn't to say these things should be free of consequence. Absolutely not. I do not want players to be able to go about on a crime spree and not answer for it. I want the most extreme punishments for the most extreme crimes. Destroy somebody in UEE space? Lose a severe amount of reputation and be exiled off into Pyro or some other lawless system. Lose all rights and privileges to the market and be forced to live your life in fear of bounty hunters, and get your gear through scavenging or black market trades. I want the game to be hard mode for those that want to harm the law-abiding. That, to me, makes the game more fun. It makes the choices you make have consequences, and those consequences change how you fundamentally play the game. Jail, in its current state, isn't a very meaningful consequence. People just escape, use marriage to get out immediately, or just log into an alt or go play a different game until their sentence is up. And when they're out, they just start with a clean slate and go commit crimes again. On the other hand, I would absolutely consider targeting another player with the intent to ruin their gameplay experience griefing, even if you're using in-game methods to do it. I actually have a pretty relevant example to give you. Back in 2022, an event similar to the experience was being held. They took sign-ups, got about 60 people together, and set off to do a tour of Stanton on an 890 jump. I snuck in wearing civilian clothing when the ship was docked and loading up. I stored my weapons and equipment in the ship's storage and ran down to the pool. When it was leaving, I put all of my gear on and ran my way up to the bridge. I neutralized the pilots, eliminated the security team, and maintained control of the bridge while our torpedo bombers attacked. Myself and everyone on board, all 60 innocent occupants, were lost to the cold, dark void of space. Was this harassment? No. Shortly afterward, I openly claimed responsibility for this action, and the leader of the event got in touch with me on Discord. He asked why I did it. I told him that I'm a xenothreat sympathizer. He accepted it, and asked me if I would leave him alone. And you know what I said? I said absolutely, and went about my business. They scheduled again, hired more security, and others tried very hard to get me to hit them again. But I knew it would be wrong and unjust to target them again and do something similar. Had I gone after them again and continued to ruin the event for everyone else, I would without a doubt consider that harassment and should 100% be punished by CIG. You can sit there all you want and say, well, they should hire more security, LOL. But you know very well that the reality of SC is that if you want to destroy somebody, it is very easy. And no matter how much security you have, you will very easily ruin that event. All of the power in this game is within the hands of the destroyer, and not the creator. Murder is piracy. Another common phrase you see thrown around by automatons masquerading as humans on platforms such as Spectrum and Reddit is murder hobo, and how it isn't piracy. I assume the people who use that phrase have been exposed to it from high-quality entertainment such as Critical Role and Geek and Sundry, and think using the phrase makes them seem more informed. They also hold the erroneous opinion that murder is a legitimate form of piracy, and that players should instead parlay, come to terms, and go on their merry way as if the movie Pirates of the Caribbean is a canonical depiction of historical piracy. Wrong! Destroying you, taking what is on your ship, and salvaging whatever remains to be sold at Grimhex is 100% legitimate piracy. I want your ship, your cargo, and your life. I am an outlaw. I will not negotiate with you. I will not give you a chance to escape or log out. I'm going to destroy you and take everything you worked hard to get. That is a simple fact of Star Citizen life. The people who complain about this are also the same people that expect PvE servers, PvP sliders, 100% safe zones, and everything else that actively goes against making an MMO an MMO. What they fail to understand is that the dangers they face out in the PU are what will one day place value upon the goods and material they are using or hauling. I'm not going to say, hire an escort, because that phrase really is just a meme at this point, but as the game develops, and that hopefully becomes a meaningful and reasonable option for players, I would suggest doing that. But simply trying to get other players to conform and play to how they think piracy should be conducted is disingenuous, because we all know that if they were given the option to pay or be destroyed, they will do everything in their power, outside of fighting back, of course, to get around it or exploit the system to avoid it by either logging out, self-destructing, or whatever else they can think of. The people claiming that they would be okay with legitimate piracy are usually liars. They use that as a front to seem more reasonable in their demands. What they really want is a complete and total separation of PvP and PvE players. That would absolutely ruin this game because danger adds value, and value creates gameplay. Weaponized Reports. There is a genuine concern to be had over a company being heavy-handed or too involved in what players do to one another in-game, within reason. And no, before you get worked up ahead to the comments, I am not talking about inappropriate chat or anything else a reasonable human being would consider inappropriate for a game, but rather what most individuals on Spectrum and Reddit consider to be inappropriate, which is usually anything they do not personally like or agree with. If a group of players, regardless of whether they are on the PvP or PvE side of the fence, witness a company getting involved and punishing players for actions in or out of game, they will without hesitation and doubt weaponize it. Trust me on this one. They will not choose to get back at you in the game. No. They will go out of the game and appeal to the company itself to take care of you. That could be a warning, suspension, or even a ban. Despite what some in the PvP community would want you to believe, this is not something that only PvE-centric players will do. I have first-hand experience of PvP-centric players doing everything in their power to get me and my community removed from numerous games because of our effectiveness within the game. It has never worked. But that did not stop them from trying. I promise you that they will do it here too if CIG is too heavy-handed on this. Why bother destroying your enemy in-game where they can respawn and come back at you when you can get them removed from the game and never have to deal with them again? To those sorts of people, weaponizing the report system and leading out-of-game brigades against users or organizations they do not like are perfectly acceptable. and they will stop at nothing until they get their way. The only thing CIG can do is ignore these sorts of people because, thankfully, those sorts tend to find another cause to champion and will move on to it eventually. True metagaming. Before people who look like this started to apply the word meta to everything and anything, it was used to describe players using out-of-game knowledge to accomplish things in-game that they would not otherwise know. An example of this would be you, the player, having meta-knowledge of the game Fallout, and knowing that a plasma pistol could be found in the sewers of the Necropolis, and making a straight line towards it at the start of the game. In the context of the aforementioned thread in Star Citizen, it has to do with out-of-game spying, organization infiltration, sabotage, social engineering, and anything else done out-of-game to gain an in-game advantage. This behavior is all very lame, and there is absolutely nothing CIG can do to prevent or punish it. They can, however, mitigate it through intelligent game design and thoughtful decisions when it comes to mechanics, but expecting them to punish or prevent it is not reasonable. This type of player behavior is now more prevalent than ever and can be traced all the way back to EVE Online over 20 years ago, where it became most popular. But it wasn't uncommon for spies to gather intelligence through alt accounts in earlier PvP-centric games such as Dark Age of Camelot or Planetside 1. What EVE did, however, is exasperate and normalize this sort of behavior to the point where it became common practice and an acceptable part of the game. I've always found it quite ironic that PvP players will blame and accuse PvE players of being the only ones who take out-of-game actions to get what they consider griefers removed, when the PvP community is just as capable, if not more, due to the competitive nature of PvP and the impact victory can have. We live in a world that is seemingly populated by lunatics, and for some reason, space games appeal to the lunatic fringe. This type of behavior will continue and become more prevalent as Star Citizen develops and matures as a game. My only advice to anyone out there who leads a community or organizes events is to assume that you are at all times being watched and plotted against, because you most likely are. Can CIG mitigate this? The only thing CIG can do about unwanted out-of-game behavior is to minimize the impact in-game actions have upon players and the world itself. This is an absolutely controversial take, but the more severe and punishing a potential loss is, the more likely a player is to do something underhanded to avoid it. I can guarantee you, if the stupid idea that is death of a spaceman becomes a reality in its original design format, players will not hesitate to use cheats to not only overcome it, but also inflict that pain and suffering on legitimate players. Similarly, if players can monopolize and destabilize an economy, and if victory becomes a true winner-takes-all scenario, you will see a massive uptick in scummy behavior and metagaming, up to and including DDoS attacks on out-of-game infrastructure. Anyone who knows me knows I used to be an idiot and play World of Warcraft. During my time there, I was heavily involved in the rated battleground scene and was a part of the top team. It was not uncommon for us to have members of our team DDoS out of the game before the match started. The same types of things happened at high-level League of Legends, and the only thing both of these games had in common was the rating that you had going up or down. People wanted so badly to be number one that they were willing to commit a federal offense to get it. This is not made up. This is 100% factual. If you're an EVE player, you undoubtedly know all of the horror stories from it. And we're not just talking about DDoS attacks, but physical attacks on people's internet service lines before a big fleet battle. It is absolute lunacy. Hell, my outfit in Planetside 2 was attacked several times via DDoS through our TeamSpeak 3 server. We ended up running 3 total to get around it because it was such a common thing every night. I learned to deal with it and live with it, but it doesn't mean I enjoyed it. Your average player isn't going to want to deal with that, nor should they. All of these things happened because victory was paramount to all, The Planetside 2 one was a bit weird since that game sucked, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But the lesson here is the more impactful something is in a game, and the more difficult it is to recover from, the more likely players are to do something they shouldn't to achieve that victory. The game Escape from Tarkov, that people love to tout around so much as an inspiration for Star Citizen FPS combat, those people are stupid, by the way, has a cheater population of over 60%. This number isn't made up. It is a documented fact. That is because death is punishing and because real-life money can be made from it. The only lesson Star Citizen should be taking from Tarkov is to treat it as a cautionary tale in game design and nothing more. The balance that CIG has to play here is to make things matter enough for people to care, but not matter so much that they're willing to do anything, up to and including committing felonies to achieve. You've already seen the beginnings of this in Star Citizen with that embarrassing CitizenCon story about one person allegedly spitting on another person with whom they are rivals within the game. I'd like you to remember this is a pre-alpha game where nothing matters right now. People are going to get much, much worse in the future. Conclusion. Xylo has handled this incident in the best way possible. The forums will always be full of PvE versus PvP tribalism, and I only hope that CIG stays the course and maintains the integrity of their product by not giving into either side. It's important that both styles of play be present and complement each other rather than remaining totally separate. Another challenge CIG faces is remaining neutral and resisting the inevitable wave of player versus developer behavior that comes from reports of griefing, out-of-game controversy, and manufactured outrage from both sides of the player base. Star Citizen is on its way to being a great game, but it still has a long way to go until the finish line. And its balance of both PvP and PvE will always be integral to its long-term success. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. I read and reply to all of them, even the ones where you call me a dummy who doesn't know anything.